Senior Program Associate in WRI's Ocean Program. I'm also a member of the Ocean Panel Secretariat, and I was coordinator of the recent blue paper on ocean employment that we're discussing today. So before we jump into the substance of the webinar, I just have a few brief housekeeping items. Firstly, today's webinar, along with all other, today's paper, along with all other knowledge products commissioned by the Ocean Panel, is available on the Ocean Panel website, and that's simply oceanpanel.org. There will also be a link in the chat box posted at some point during this webinar. We also have QR codes in the presentation that will take you directly to the report. Secondly, we hope to have some time to respond to questions from you, the audience. And so we encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. So please, when you ask a question, indicate a panelist who you would like to respond if you have a preference. And also be sure to make sure that what you write is a question as opposed to a statement. And finally, today's webinar is being recorded, and you will all receive a message within the next few weeks with details on how to access that recording. So to provide context now to those of you who might be less familiar with the Ocean Panel, the panel was established in September 2018. It's composed of 18 serving world leaders, and it's co-chaired by the Prime Minister of Norway and the President of Palau, alongside support from the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Ocean. As you can see from the map on your screens, the Ocean Panel is unique. It comprises members from across the world, nations large and small, across all ocean basins, every stage of economic development, and at extremes of the ocean environment, from the tropics to the Arctic. The Ocean Panel aims to facilitate a better, more resilient future for people and the planet. And the goal is to deliver a sustainable ocean economy. And that's one where there's effective protection of the environment, sustainable production, and also equitable prosperity, and all of these going hand in hand. And that means through 100% sustainable management of national waters, guided by sustainable ocean plans. So a key foundation of the Ocean Panel is a real focus on best available science and knowledge to inform the decision-making. And to this end, Ocean Panel members have commissioned a large series of reports and papers on a variety of topics that are relevant to achieving a sustainable ocean economy. And these have been produced through engagement with over 400 scientists, policy experts, and indigenous leaders from over 60 countries, and with a focus on real diversity of authorship. The process is overseen and contributed to by the Ocean Panel Secretariat, as well as the 3 lead experts of the expert group, which you can see on the left-hand side of the slide. The key findings and recommendations from past Ocean Panel papers and reports have been condensed into an action-oriented document called the Transformations Agenda. And the blue paper that we're exploring today was commissioned to help achieve an ambition within that agenda that by 2030, ocean literacy has been enhanced worldwide. People understand the value of the ocean and have acquired the skills and knowledge to participate in a sustainable ocean economy. And so with that in mind, it's my pleasure now to introduce the blue paper co-lead authors to dive into its contents further. Dr. Charles Colgan is the Director of Research of the Center for the Blue Economy at Middlesbrough Institute of International Studies at Monterey. He also serves as Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Ocean and Coastal Economics and holds a BA in History and Government from Colby College and a PhD in Economic History from the University of Maine. Dr. Mark Spalding is an expert on international ocean policy and law, blue economy finance and investment, and coastal and marine philanthropy. He has been president of the Ocean Foundation since 2003, and he holds a BA in History with honors from Claremont McKenna College, a JD from Loyola Law School, and a master's degree in Pacific International Affairs from the University of California, San Diego. And Layla Ben Hassan is an expert in communications and the blue economy. She has extensive experience in thought leadership, sustainability, gender equality, and financial inclusion. She is the founder and CEO of Blue Jay Communication and the creator of the Africa Blue Economy Forum. Layla holds a master's degree in business management and a sustainability leadership certificate from Imperial College London Business School. And so I'll hand over now to Mark to go ahead and tell us more about this blue paper.
Thank you very much, Oliver, for the introduction and context. Just a quick overview to start. The ocean economy currently employs over 130 million people and contributes over 1.5 trillion per year to the global economy, and that's predicted to grow substantially between now and 2030. Sectors that we put in the ocean economy include fisheries, coastal tourism, marine transport, ocean offshore energy, marine construction, and the like. Climate change and environmental degradation from climate change and other sources are necessitating a transition to a more sustainable ocean economy, the subset of all of the ocean economy that is sustainable. This transition will be a fundamental transformation in how we interact with all ocean resources. We expect there will be major challenges in getting there: skills gaps, continuing regional disparities, social equity concerns. But emerging sectors from this transition could generate millions of new jobs by 2050. Success requires coordinated action from multiple stakeholders, and that's why this report was prepared for the Ocean Panel. For this report, we employed a comprehensive Delphi method to forecast employment changes in the sustainable ocean economy. To do this, we reached out to hundreds of experts and ended up engaging 181 experts across 6 continents through 4 structured survey rounds. The expert panel was geographically distributed, with the largest representation from Europe, followed by North America, Africa, Asia, Oceania, South America, and the Middle East. The participants represented diverse sectors, including academia, business, consulting, government, and NGOs, with expertise spanning marine policy, economics, blue food systems, environmental protection, and emerging ocean technologies. Through the iterative rounds of anonymous feedback and consensus building, the experts identified 7 key drivers of workforce change and assessed their impacts on various ocean economy sectors, providing the crucial insights into employment transitions that we foresee for 2030 and 2050, while maintaining our rigor through the controlled anonymity and systematic convergence, pushing towards expert consensus. Now, there were challenges. This is, hard to make something as representative as one wishes, but I think we are very much informed by a tremendous group of volunteers who served as our expert panel. Advance, please. Again, as I mentioned, the ocean economy already employs over 100 million people globally, with East Asia and South Asia representing the largest employment regions. 7 key drivers were identified by our experts to reshape ocean employment through 2050, and those are climate change, investment access, sustainable practices that are adopted by businesses, changing demand by consumers for ocean goods, services, renewable energy, and then as opposed to voluntary adoption, sustainability requirements. And then, of course, there are just, some great emerging innovative sectors that we're observing. Marine renewable energy represents the highest growth potential for future employment, with projected 1.2 million jobs coming by 2050 across multiple dimensions. Across multiple industries, including electrical generation, shipping, marine construction, and electrical equipment manufacturing, while traditional sectors like offshore oil and gas are likely to face significant declines in workforce. These major workforce challenges include substantial skills gaps between current capacities and future needs, limited access to training in developing nations, and significant regional disparities in infrastructure and institutional capacity. A just transition to a sustainable ocean economy could create up to 4 million new green jobs by 2050, but requires coordinated action across stakeholders to ensure benefits are distributed equitably and vulnerable communities are protected. Over to you, Charlie.
So good morning, afternoon, whatever time suits your taste. I'm going to take a little deeper dive into the employment numbers that Mark has sort of hit the highlights on. In particular, I want to emphasize a couple of key themes, one of which is our measurement of the ocean economy globally is at a far lower standard than I think most people would like it to be. Nonetheless, we are able to, I think, sketch out some general trends, which fortunately for our project, the OECD did in a report that was released at about the same time this report was released. And in that study, the most important finding, other than the data gaps issue, was that there is a very large scale transition in employment and the value added of the ocean economy that is literally just around the corner. And the future growth path for the ocean economy is likely to be slower than it has been over the last 20 years or so. And the only choice is between somewhat slower and significantly slower. So I'll talk a little bit about what those choices are and how we will have to go about making them. Let's start with a question of how big is it today, and how can we, from what point do we measure future growth? And here we find a particularly knotty problem that affects the ocean economy globally. And that is the base year of the employment estimates in most of the data series around the world was around 2020 or 2021. And as you can see from this graph, from 1995 to 2019, the global ocean economy added somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 million jobs, but then lost, according to this, nearly 32 million jobs in 1 year, in 2020. And of course, that's COVID. And that's the effect on the global tourism and recreation industry. And because that is, in virtually every country, the largest employer in the ocean economy, when the shutdown came because of COVID, it affected the ocean economy far more than almost any other, certainly any other natural resource sector, and more than most industries. Go to the next slide. So you can see that here. This is employment in millions of people. And you can see marine and coastal tourism, the largest sector, and you can see that it lost something on the order of 28 million jobs from 2019 to 2020, after having modest growth from 1995 to 2019. I have to say that I think that the estimates here of the relatively modest growth from 95 to 2019 were probably low. That is, more growth occurred. Offshore oil and gas, not much change. Transportation and ports, again, a big run up in 1995 to 2019, and then a hit in 2020. Same thing is true in fishing and aquaculture. Shipbuilding, not so much. You could spread out when you're building the ship, and it wasn't so much the health effects. The health threat was not as high. Related transportation related services. Then offshore wind barely was moving in 2019, 2020 compared to where it is now in most of the world, US being an exception, of course. Where it's likely to go in the future. In that sense, the 2019, 2020 number doesn't mean very much, because all of the growth, the significant growth in that sector lies in the future. Next slide. So here is the choice slide that I mentioned. So the top slide is what OECD calls the fast transition in comparison with the baseline. So their baseline estimates our baseline forecast out to 2050, which would basically be a continuation of the trends from 1995 to 2019. So if you take that and more or less straight line it out, you get to a number around 375 million jobs in 2050. But they argue, and I think correctly, that that's not going to happen, that there is a significant change underway, largely driven by what's happening in the energy sector. And that is the shift from fossil fuels to renewables. And that shift is gonna affect employment in two ways. First, it's going to lift employment in the renewables sector, but the renewables sector does not require nearly as many people to generate a given amount of energy as does the oil and gas sector, which requires a lot of people to be working offshore and onshore to generate, to produce a certain amount, a given amount of energy. And so that change is likely to occur, and it will pull down offshore oil and gas, but increase renewables. And renewables will become as large or larger than oil and gas is today. But it will be much more widespread around the world, even though the labor intensity is somewhat smaller. Now, it's possible that this transition will be stalled. It may be that what will happen is that, as happened here in the US, people will decide they don't want renewable energy in the oceans. They don't want wind or other forms of renewables. And so they will try to keep offshore oil and gas in place. That will not help out the employment situation, however, because oil and gas will continue to decline simply because of the exhaustion of the resource base itself, and the growth that would have been offered by the shift to renewables will have been foregone. And so you see in that second line that what OECD calls the stalled transition. We don't make this transition in the energy sectors. And so as a result of that, we're down around 150 million jobs, whereas we're at about 250 million jobs if we get the transition done. Let's do the next slide. So this is the projected gross value added, and let's just do the next slide after that. Yeah, so this is the forecast out to 2050. You can see marine and coastal tourism is likely to have, these are the fast transition versus slow transition. While I've described the effects of this as primarily in the energy sector, it's also that the shift to renewables allows for much more efficient industries in places like ocean and coastal tourism, in shipbuilding, and so on. So in all the sectors, if we can make the transition quickly over the next 20 years, we will get a lot more employment in every sector except offshore oil and gas than if we try to cling on to an ocean economy primarily based as it is now in terms of, or focused now as in terms of energy. Let's go to the next one. Now, it has to be said that this is what I just painted is the macro picture affecting the overall level of employment in the ocean economy. There's a lot of detail that is not picked up by what I just talked about. I've divided the details areas into three groups. Sectors that we are not measuring right now, they're not in any of these projections, they're not in the history, they're not in the projections, but are likely to be much more consequential in the future. We're just not picking them up in our existing systems. Desalination is certainly one. Coastal construction, because of sea level rise, most of the shoreline of the world will have to be rebuilt over the next 50 years. Marine research and education is a huge sector that's very badly measured in any of the national data. And finally, things like new technologies like marine pharmaceuticals, we know have substantial potential, but for a whole bunch of reasons, it's very difficult to discern exactly where it is today and how big it can be in the future. There are three areas we've identified as critical sustainability actions that will affect the future of industries. A big one is IUU fisheries, illegal underreported fisheries. The world catches too much fish, most of it illegally. How much of that is able to be brought under some kind of control so that stock exploitation can be brought within biological limits is a big question. Habitat conservation and restoration. Around the world, a big part of a growing part of the ocean economy is restoring habitats that were destroyed in the headlong rush to urbanization. These are primarily wetlands and estuarine systems. And protecting ocean health. There is a lot more to be done to develop technologies and deploy technologies that can protect ocean health, including things like dealing with plastics pollution. Finally, I've put a couple of wild cards in. Everybody says that these are really critical, big ticket items and potentially in the future. One is deep sea mining, which has been promised now for 50 years, And then right now there's only, I think, one commercial venture underway in the world. Is it likely to grow? Yes. How much is it likely to grow? To say that that's a controversial question is a vast understatement. And finally, transportation and ports. So it is expected, despite current trade policy in certain countries, that transportation and trade will continue to grow. But will it continue to grow in the types of ships we're building now? Already there are autonomously driven ships entering into service, very small scale, but it is unlikely that the transportation industry will remain insulated from significant capital improvements that reduce the demand for labor, even as the demand for the services into the transportation sector grows. So I call those wild cards. We don't know when and how they will affect over the next 20 years, but they will have some effect. It's just we can't tell from this point. So that's a quick overview of what's in the report. The major trends, the problems with data are the data problems are much more explored in the report. I don't want to leave you with the impression that we have no data, so I've not talked about it as much as I probably should have. But really, a lot of opportunities out there, but a lot of really big decisions to be made over the next 5 to 10 years as to what kind of ocean economy we want out to 2050. And I'll turn it over to Leila.
Thank you, Charlie. Good afternoon, everyone. So the table you see here is only a snapshot of the roles and needs of different ocean stakeholders. In the blue paper, we explored this section in much more depth. When we talk about the workforce in a sustainable ocean economy in the future, one truth stands out. No single actor can steer this transition alone. The sea is too vast. The challenges are too deep, and the opportunities are too wide. Collaboration is not optional. It is the engine of a just, inclusive, and sustainable ocean economy. It is exactly what Mark mentioned earlier. The success of this transition needs definitely a tight collaboration between the different ocean stakeholders. So picture the transition as a ship setting sail. It needs many hands on deck. And let's start with governments. So governments chart the course, shaping policies, financing trainings, and enforcing regulations. Intergovernmental organizations keep us aligned, setting standards and the frameworks that build trust across nations. Industry and the private sector powers innovation, creating technologies and jobs that are decent and inclusive. Financial institutions fuel the journey. They are able and help to unlock capital through tools like blue bonds, embedded finance, and this will help when it is including the ESGs in every transaction. Civil society, from NGOs to trade unions. It is the conscience on board. Amplify marginalized voices that are too often ignored, ensuring equity and holding the stakeholders accountable. Academia trains the crew, building not just graduates, but a workforce with relevance, resilience, and readiness for the jobs of tomorrow. And finally, and at the heart, coastal communities, holders of traditional knowledge, frontline stewards of resources, and guarantors of equity. So, this is just a transition. It is not possible if all these groups do not work together. They need to row in this journey in the same direction toward shared goals. The next slide, please. But even when every hand on deck, the waters are not calm and the journey is not smooth sailing. It will be disruptive. There are storms that we must face head-on. So there are a few challenges. Here we will mention a few, and as Charlie mentioned, there are quite that we covered on the blue paper, but let's focus on few only. So first of all, data. Charlie highlighted this and he was emphasizing it was one of the biggest challenge up to date. We lack good data. Many ocean jobs are informal or poorly tracked, and making effective workforce planning is almost impossible. So how can we navigate in a dark? Second, there is a massive skills gap. Workers trained for declining sectors like offshore, oil and gas don't automatically have the skills to go to another sector and use the old skills to go, for example, to offshore wind or conservation. The gap is huge, and training opportunities are often limited, especially in developing nations, where weak infrastructure and a lack of financial resources hold back progress. Next challenge, equity and inclusion. Women, youth, and coastal communities are at risk, being pushed even further behind. And finally, there are some external pressures like climate change, environmental decline, and technological disruption. These powerful forces will reshape jobs whether we are ready or not. The key message here is urgency. If we delay, inequality deepens, opportunities vanish, and resilience weakness. So the question becomes what we have to do right now to build the foundations for tomorrow. That takes us to the immediate priorities. Our research points two horizons, the urgent and the foundational, the now and the next. The now is about urgent practical steps. First, we need to collect better data, either regional, sectorial, or community-based. We must know where we stand. Second, foster collaboration. No more silos. Only co-creation. Shared problems required shared solutions. Third, embedded equity and inclusion into all policies and strategies from the start, and not added as afterthought. The next is about laying the foundations. So we have education and training. So we need to have expansion and access to youth, women, and future leaders to gain skills that are relevant to a future-ready workforce. And finally, we need innovative financing models, from the blue bonds to blended finance, to ensure this transition is not just planned, but actually funded and scaled. The message also is clear. The choices that we make in the next 5 years will set the foundation and the bedrock for the ocean workforce in 2050. If we get the foundation right, the future can be fair, resilient, and prosperous. And beyond foundation, we need bold and strategic actions. So what does strategic action look like? What does it mean? We need a strong international cooperation that harmonizes governance, aligns rules, and shares resources fairly. Targeted funding, not just for conservation, but for workforce development. We need skills and jobs to go hand in hand. Ocean accounts that guide decisions with evidence and not just guesswork. We also must accelerate digital transformation, but with equity, so technology is able to unite and not divide. And above all, we need to build social protection mechanisms, safety nets for workers in transition, and create clear pathways to move from informal to formal employment. The message also here is clear: transformation. If we get this right by 2030, we can have the future-proof, digitally enabled, socially inclusive, and powers a truly sustainable ocean economy. So, let me leave you with this summary. We know what and who must act. Every stakeholder has a role. We are all responsible for this transition. We know the challenges. We know the immediate steps, and we also know the long-term vision. A resilient, inclusive, future-ready workforce. This is not just about jobs. It's about people, about prosperity, and about the planet. And the choices we make today will determine whether the ocean economy of 2050 will be sustainable, equitable, and above all, truly for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark, Layla, Charlie. That was a very informative presentation. We now have an opportunity to delve into the research in a bit more detail. And I'm also happy to welcome Dr. Tim Slingsby to join this discussion. Tim is Director of Skills and Education at Lloyd's Register Foundation. He was a co-author of this blue paper, and he's a highly skilled science and engineering education specialist and science communicator. He has extensive experience of working in academia and in both private and public sectors. And he's currently serving as the chair of the Maritime Charities Group. So I encourage everyone listening to get involved with this discussion. We have just about 20 minutes. Please submit questions through the Q&A box, as we mentioned at the start of the webinar. We're going to try and respond to as many of these as we can, but just noting that we have limited time. So apologies if we don't make it to your question. I'd like to start with a few questions for our panelists, and then we can move to some of the audience questions. So Charlie, I would like to start with you, please. We've heard that a core challenge that we faced when producing the paper was poor availability and accessibility of data on the ocean economy. And one step that is promoted to help tackle this is the development of national ocean accounts. Could you just briefly explain what these are and why they're important, please?
Sure. Ocean accounts are simply a way of keeping track of the current state of the ocean. The accounting, there are a lot of different ways it can be done. As envisioned in its complete set, one part of the accounts looks at the contribution of the ocean to national and regional economies, jobs, output, value-added wages, and so on. The same time, the ocean accounts are a way of keeping track of the status of natural resource contributions. For example, measuring the value of the fish stocks, not just the fishing industry. Looking at the value of environmental protection, not just the particular outcomes or industries. And then the most recent developments in ocean accounts look at ecosystem services. We are measuring both the physical and economic status of ocean and coastal ecosystems in terms of their ability to produce resources, for example, to serve as juvenile fish habitat, to regulate, such as carbon mix in the ocean as a regulation of climate, and cultural services such as tourism and recreation. So ocean accounts have evolved as a way of being able to keep track of all of the relevant economic, ecological, and social contributions of the ocean over time. The idea is to keep a set of accounts of where things are every year, which allows us to track change, just as we do with the national economy, in terms of, you know, GDP and employment output, part of which we see related to the ocean. I should mention that ocean accounts have been increasingly used around the world. Most of the EU countries, Canada, Mexico, the US, a number of countries in South America, a number of countries in Asia. There are something like 40 countries that pledged to develop ocean accounts at the recent UN conference in Nice. So it's a hot topic with a lot of interest in what the ocean accounts are and how they can be developed and applied to real decision making in a relatively short order of time.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie, and really great to see that increased momentum at the UN Ocean Conference as well in terms of ocean accounts. Leila, I'd just like to turn to you next. We've heard you talking about the importance of collaboration as being a key requirement of a transition to a sustainable ocean economy. If you could, maybe if you could share some proven approaches to fostering collaboration. I know sometimes it's difficult to promote that connection between, for example, government and NGOs and private sector. Do you have any quick suggestions of how to foster that?
Thank you, Olive. A very good question. In fact, we mentioned it earlier, collaboration is extremely important in this transition. And usually when we talk about collaboration, too often it means consultation. So governments set the rules and industry get to be asked for comments, NGOs comes at the end, and it's not really collaboration, but a tokenism. So true collaboration is co-creation. Governments, businesses, and civil society must design together from the very start the policies, the training, and the frameworks that shape tomorrow's workforce. But to co-create, we also need a common compass. Right now, sector use the same data, the same assumption, the same forecast. It shouldn't be this way. So if we have shared platforms, exactly, come back to Charlie, ocean accounts, skills maps, foresight studies, we can align everyone to the same horizon. And evidence builds trust, and trust breaks silos. And we have seen that. I mean, we have seen success stories. We have seen some government and private sector are doing it, collaborating very strongly together. And we can mention as an example, the Norway offshore wind transition. So the government created the enabling frameworks, then the industry, they put billions in this project. And then the NGOs, they made sure that environmental safeguard is at the heart and were respected. That's how the new industry takes a route through co-creation and not silos. The lesson is very clear when it comes to collaboration. Without collaboration, we drift. our efforts remain fragmented. And with it, we align ambition, we scale innovation, we build a just and inclusive ocean economy. There are so many examples. We can give another example of in the Western Indian Ocean region, the example of Blue Future Initiative. It operates for the whole regional alliance that united governments, universities, NGOs, and private sector to co-develop innovation, co-design the training program, and producing job ready for the next need of the next 5 years, and even more than that. It's all coordinated work that has a lot of positive impact. That's why we keep insisting on tight collaboration between the different ocean stakeholders.
Thanks, Leila. I'd like to turn to Tim now, actually, and talk about safety, which I think has some links in there in terms of the importance of training and collaborative producing these co-creation collaborative training programs. Tim, I'm sure everyone can appreciate the importance of safety in general, but people may not think so much about the link between safety and sustainability. I was wondering if you could just unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah, with pleasure. And because we want to hear from the audience as well, I'll do my best to be brief. Of course, all those of us working with the ocean economy are aware that working at sea is, of course, exciting and rewarding in many ways and on many levels, but it's also difficult and it's dangerous, and harm at work in various ocean economy sectors is reported more than in any other type of sector around the world, with the possible exceptions of construction and mining. At the same time, of course, we're in the middle of incredible change and challenge, increased risks from the climate crisis, increased uncertainty from the rapid emergence of new tech and the transitions to new fuels. And we know that the transition, as Mark and Leila and Charlie have laid out, is going to require the mobilization of huge amounts of financial, material, and human resources. But if people don't have safe and decent work, if new ships, if new port infrastructure, if new renewable energy platforms are not safe, if new fuels are not safe, we will fail. It's as simple as that. We must ensure that all ocean economy workforces have the right capacity, capabilities, and understanding to enable a safe transition. At the foundation, we often use the phrase, if it's not safe, it's not sustainable. Safety is simply a critical precondition for the adoption of sustainable practices, or for the adoption of sustainable new technologies across the maritime system, in shipping, in regulation, in insurance, fishing, aquaculture, and all of the coastal communities that have been referred to already. So, of course, let's not shy away from the fact that the challenge is absolutely massive, but we must meet that challenge. And as Leila and Mark so eloquently pointed out, none of us can act in isolation. So we must meet it with a coordinated effort. And that's why at the foundation, for example, we deliberately talk about a maritime system. Pulling one lever anywhere in an ocean economy affects any number of other things. But the take-home message is, if it's not safe, it's not sustainable.
Thanks, Tim. That's a good mantra that I can remember. I just have a question for Mark, and then I'm going to turn to the audience questions. So maybe just a quick response from Mark. I wanted to ask you about technological advancements, AI and automation, for example, and thinking about how that might take some workers out of positions of greater potential harm towards more desk-based jobs, for example. Could you talk to us a little bit about the impact that you expect this technological advancement might have on employment in the ocean economy?
Thanks, Oliver. We've been doing a little bit of thinking about this and just published an article in the Journal of Ocean Technology on it. I think the integration of AI and automation into the ocean economy writ large is likely to create a really complex employment landscape, both displacing but also creating new opportunities. Traditional maritime roles like routine vessel operations, cargo handling, basic monitoring tasks, we're already seeing automation. We're witnessing autonomous ships for specific routes, automated port operations, and AI-driven fishing fleet management. I think this is going to reduce the demand for some conventional maritime jobs, particularly those involving very repetitive tasks. However, the ocean economy is simultaneously creating new employment categories, and there's a growing demand for, the technicians who can maintain and operate this sophisticated marine technology, data analysts who can interpret ocean sensor networks, and specialists in marine renewable energy systems. So the blue economy's expansion into areas like offshore wind, marine biotech, sustainable aquaculture, all of that is generating entirely new job categories. So I think on balance, we're going to be in good place. But we do see some existing roles that are evolving. Commercial fishers are increasingly becoming more data-informed operators using AI for stock assessment and route optimization. Marine biologists working with AI tools for species identification and ecosystem monitoring. Port workers transitioning from manual labor to being the people behind the automated systems. And this impact will vary significantly also, I might need to mention, by region. Developing coastal nations might leapfrog traditional maritime infrastructure directly to automated systems, while established maritime economies may face more challenging transitions for their workforce and some pushback from that workforce. The key challenge is going to be ensuring the workforce development keeps pace with technology, particularly in providing retraining opportunities for displaced workers, educational pathways for emerging roles in the digital ocean economy in a transition that is fair and equitable.
Thanks, Mark. There's some really exciting opportunities in there as well. So it's great to hear. We have just a few minutes left, and so I wanted to turn to some audience questions. There's one from Chris Murray here, who's asking, do we have a practical example of where key stakeholders are working together to mobilize resources and begin to create opportunities at a local level, with a particular emphasis on youth? I was wondering, Tim, if you might like to respond to that.
Can do. One example comes immediately to mind, and it speaks to another question I spotted about restorative aquaculture as well. A few years ago, with CNRS and the UN Global Compact, the foundation started something that these days is called the Global Seaweed Coalition. And we started with just 2 or 3 members, and I was just trying to get up-to-date information about how many people around the world, how many institutions around the world are now part of the Global Seaweed Coalition. It is over 2,000, and it represents the entire value chain within this growing industry. Now, we started being interested in that because we could see that where the industry was growing outside of Asia, it was fragmented and yet had huge potential. And our interest was to make sure that this industry arrives safely. So safety was the convening point. Funding was, of course, provided initially, and the amount of interest and political interest this has generated has been nothing short of phenomenal, to the extent that the Global Seaweed Coalition is behind this becoming a initiative at the highest levels of the UN. Several UN partners are joining forces towards the UN Global Seaweed Initiative that will be announced at the UN General Assembly later this month. So that is a really good opportunity, and the sorts of opportunities that have been, it's a really good example, because the sorts of opportunities that are being revealed are everything from those sort of intergovernmental opportunities to local opportunities for employment and development of employment opportunities in everywhere from Tanzania to Namibia to Norway and China. It's just a great example.
Oliver, if I can jump in there as well, I think Leila mentioned blue bonds in the finance discussion, and I think we are seeing examples of the use of blue bonds to finance blue economy efforts in developing countries, and I think some of that has included opportunities for youth. and or changes. One of the things we've been looking at has been changes in shipbreaking in Southeast Asia, India, etc., to eliminate jobs that are extremely dangerous for children who have suffered physical injuries and other toxicology injuries as a result of being manual labor for shipbreaking that needs to be replaced.
Thanks, Mark and Tim. Yeah, I think we just have perhaps time for one more question. I'd like to ask Charlie actually on this one. There's a question from Margarita Almodovar. She asks, are social accounts integrated into ocean accounts? In particular, is the impact of the blue economy on coastal communities taken into account? So Charlie, you might be able to give a quick answer on that one.
The answer is yes, but it's a very sporadic. It's very sporadic, yes. I think that most of the countries that are doing ocean accounts do want to evolve them into social accounts. The problem is that the basic measurements that are needed to be structured into accounts are highly variable. That is, there are a lot of different ways you can do it. There's no, as with, for example, an industry, you can measure output, you can measure wages, employment, and so on. Pretty standard stuff. With social accounting, there are a lot of different ways to do it. And the data, the underlying data that you need to construct the account is rarely collected on a sufficiently systematic basis, that is temporally and spatially consistent basis over a period of time, that you can construct the account. So I would say that the social account remains a little more aspirational than the other accounts, largely because of data issues, but we can expect that the greater attention to ocean accounts to make significant strides to overcome that in a lot of places over the next decade.
Thanks, Charlie. We're coming up to the top of the hour, so unfortunately, I think we're going to have to cut it now in terms of further discussions. I see there are a number of questions in the chat that we didn't make it to, so apologies for those. I'd like to really thank Mark, Charlie, Layla, and Tim for their time, for their insights today. Thank you also to everyone who's been listening for your attention and for the good engagement as well. I'd just like to highlight that the blue paper can be downloaded for free on the Ocean Panel website, and my colleague is just bringing up the QR code there. So if you are keen to explore the topic in more detail, please head over to that report and have a read. So I think I'll just say thank you again, and I wish everyone a really enjoyable rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.